Today we're going to be talking about managing test anxiety, and we're going to work through a few things. So you have your handouts, and we'll talk about those a little bit later. But before we start, if you are here to get your Goose Chase points, go ahead and you can take a picture of the screen. You can do anything. Just make sure you do that right now. And then at the end, if you have anything that you need me to sign for another different program that you're in, just hang out until the end, and I'll make sure to sign that before you leave. Throughout the workshop, if you have any questions, please feel free to stop me, raise your hand. It's going to be very interactive, so I'm going to be asking you to answer a lot of questions and to contribute as much as you can. So I'm not afraid of silence. So if you are wanting me to wait out, I'll wait you out. So that's that. Before we jump into our workshop, I just want to talk a little bit about what SARC is and the services that we have to offer. Has anyone here heard of SARC before? Okay, cool. It's most of you. So SARC stands for Student Academic Resource Center, and we have a variety of different services that are free for you to use. So we have one thing which is peer tutoring. Is if you go to our lab, we have two labs. We have one in the engineering building, and then we have one in Trevor Colburn Hall, where we host all of our tutoring sessions. Our tutors are there. They've taken the class. They've gotten good grades in it, and now they hold tutoring sessions for you to come in. Those are broad in terms of those are covering all the professors for, let's say you're taking Orgo 1, all the instructors of Orgo 1 are being covered by one tutor. Then we have supplemental instruction, or SI, which is another service similar to tutoring, but it's a little bit more targeting specific instructor and sections per course. So let's say there are 4 instructors for Orgo 1. They're going to be probably 3 to 4 SI leaders that hold review sessions for that class. Those are 50-minute sessions that are held around campus. So if you're in a class that has SI, then you would have to go into their schedule and figure out where they are and when they're going to be happening. Besides those two, those are very specific to courses. We also have academic coaching and engagement, or ACE, which is a service that we provide for students to it's similar to what we talk about in workshops, but it's more targeted towards one person, because it's a one-on-one relationship or one-on-one meeting where you get to talk specifically about whatever you're struggling with in your courses, whatever, maybe you're not really struggling with the content, but rather time management. So you can meet with a coach and discuss all that and find ways that would support you that best meet your own needs. So for example, if you hate paper planners, you can go ahead and talk to them, and they'll find other resources that are using a Google Calendar or something like that that would be more geared towards something that you might be more likely to use. Then we also have academic success workshops, so you know about those, and you can find the rest of our schedule online. We have a few more workshops throughout the semester, and we also have the recordings of this. This is actually being recorded in live stream at the moment, I think. Yes. So even if later you want to go over it, you can. And then we also have some older workshops if you're interested in those. And finally, we have some online support. So we have OPAL, which is our online peer assistant learning service, which is basically tutoring or SI for specific classes online. So you have an hour and a half, an hour, 20 minutes of a session that you can, from the comfort of your home, watch and interact with the tutor or SI leader to go over content. And then we also have some other resources, like all of the handouts that I gave you. We have even more of those on SARC Online, so you can access those, and they're actually really, really helpful. Every time we go to do a workshop, we go through that because they're actually geared towards whatever students really need in their college life. Any questions about any of the SARC resources? Cool. Again, I highly encourage you to go to all of them. They are free for you to use, and most of them don't need to set up an appointment except for academic coaching. So we're going to jump into what is anxiety. So for you all, what is anxiety? What do you think it entails? Yes?
When you don't have enough time to finish all the questions in an exam.
Yes, and you're freaking out. You're like, ooh, you see the time running, and you're like, how can I do this? Awesome. What else?
Always imagining the worst case scenario.
Yes, and that's the meme that I got. You might be studying, and you've been studying for hours, and you're like, I'm still gonna get a 0 on that test. It's not gonna happen. I know it. That happens to me all the time, yes.
It's like the obsession over that fear.
Yes. And I like that word obsession. Like, it comes to a time sometimes where you're like, you just can't stop thinking about it. It's just like you try to go to bed and you keep thinking about it, and then you wake up in the middle of the night and you're still thinking about it. It's quite horrible. Anyone else? So that is, you've all kind of like related it a little bit to what you would see in your classes. But there's a few like body signs that tell you that you're anxious. One is holding your breath or quick breathing. Another is hyperarousal or awareness of everything around you. So it might happen that people start doing things that you didn't realize before that they were doing, and now you're just being annoyed by it. Another thing is having your muscles tense. I don't know if you've felt that. Like sometimes you leave an exam and then all of your body like aches because you're just so tense. Another thing is racing thoughts, which we mentioned a little bit about, and I think for me, like that's the one thing that I know. I think for everybody, it's just a little bit different how the symptoms come to be, and for me, racing thoughts, that's like the main one. You also have rapid heart rate, nausea, and cold or sweaty palms. So again, these are a few of the ones that exist, but there are even more that are very specific and very individual for you all. So it's also finding ways to identify them. So like if you're about to be taking a big exam, you can start identifying those by realizing things that were not happening to you before. So for me, nausea and racing thoughts, like that's a constant. Like every time I'm nervous about something, every time I'm anxious about something, those two come right away. And I'm like, okay, I'm anxious. That's when I have to calm down. Like I have to find my own ways of coping. And there are two forms of anxiety. So one is your everyday anxiety, which is worrying about a breakup, paying bills, feeling self-conscious in large groups. Maybe you're nervous because before an exam or a presentation. Who here loves public speaking? Yeah, I thought so. So those are a few things that are normal of your everyday life that happen to all of us. To some extent, some people experience them more than others, and in some situations more than others. Like maybe for you, presenting in front of a group is super normal, it's super casual, that doesn't bother you. But maybe having to pay a bill, maybe making a specific phone call, having a conversation, those bring a lot of anxiety for you. But there's a difference between that everyday anxiety and then your anxiety disorder, which is that constant unwarranted worry that affects your day. So you cannot function because you're just worried all the time. And then you start avoiding situations because of fear, because you don't want to be there. You're thinking about all those horrible things that could happen, and then you just don't move because of it. And having panic attacks at the thought of taking an exam, you just can't concentrate. You sit down and our thoughts keep racing, and you cannot move past those. So in that case, that's where you will need some extra help and maybe go to CAPS, so the Counseling and Psychological Services here on campus, because they can help you by providing you with some other resources. But your everyday anxiety comes from a few things that we're going to be talking about throughout the workshop that can be managed and that you can control to a certain extent to be more calm when it comes to taking the exam. So again, test anxiety is a little bit different. So you've got that sweating, rapid breathing, you have maybe that tummy ache, you have rapid heart rate, you're trembling, hard to think clearly, maybe you get the exam and you're shaking, or you're like, for me, it's always I'm freaking out that I'm forgetting something that I should have brought. Like whether it's my ID that I had to bring, a pencil, a piece of paper, my Scantron. I check for my Scantron like 10 times before walking in, and I know I have it. I remember coming to the union and getting it, but still as I'm walking in, I'm like, I forgot it. I know I did. I brought the wrong Scantron, something like that. It's always something like that. So it's a little bit different. So if you're here, it's probably because you've heard of test anxiety and you're maybe like, okay, maybe I have some of that. So what are some of the things you've realized that happened to you when you're about to take a test? Headache? Okay. That's a good one. What else?
You get like rapid heart rate.
Rapid heart rate. You're like,
Yeah, and I'm chill physically, but, feel on the inside, it's like, oh, wow, I have a little bit of anxiety right
yeah,
now.
you're a little bit freaking out. What else?
You kind of go through the notes really quick that you feel like you're going to forget it.
Yeah. I think that's a very common one. Like just feeling like you're going to forget everything. You're like, I know I studied for all these hours, and I know you put me a question, like I could do a question right before the test, but I know I'm going to forget it. Yes.
You feel pretty overwhelmed.
Yes, that's a huge one. If you feel like all the content is coming at you, you're like, I cannot manage this. How am I going to do it? All that. Great. So there are a few different things, and again, everybody does it differently, and I think it also depends on the test. Some classes, like, you wouldn't worry about the tests. You would be like, that's an easy one. Like, I know I'm going to pass it. I know I'm going to get a 100 or whatever. But then for other ones, those are like the ones that really push you, and like, even if it's like 3 weeks from now, you're still thinking, you're like, I have a test coming up in like 2 weeks or something like that, and then you start stressing out about it. And they all, to some extent, come from one thing. So when it comes to test anxiety, always, or the majority of time, is you thinking or not being sure of whether or not you know the material. That's a huge thing when it comes to controlling test anxiety. So there's a difference between thinking you know it and knowing you know it. So thinking you know it, you might have a lack of understanding, and there's usually lack of preparation. So you maybe have been procrastinating, you have ineffective study skills, you're not really able to concentrate, or you have a pressure to get like a great percentage. So if you're coming up for the final, I was talking to one of our SI leaders this morning. She's a Calc 1 SI leader, and she tells us that they need medical support when they are going to take their final exams. Because people are crying and people are fainting and people are going through all this. And that's usually because they are not really prepared, and because it's likely that if they don't pass with a certain grade this final exam, they're going to fail the class. So the first thing would be make sure you get your good grades from the beginning of the semester, and then figuring out how you should prepare for these exams. So one of the best ways to prepare is by using self-testing. Does anyone know what self-testing is? Or have any idea of what it could be? Yeah.
Like practice exams for the exam.
Yeah.
Even just compiling some questions out of the textbook and then working on it through yourself, but then also, setting a timer so you have a proper pace set up.
Yeah, awesome. It's just figuring out, finding a way of making sure you can bring up the content, you can say it without having to refer back to any type of baseline. So it could be you're using Quizlet, it could be you're reciting it, it could be you're explaining an entire problem to a friend. There are different ways, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. But it's just finding ways, because there's a difference between remembering and knowing it. When you remember something, you can identify it out of a group of things. When you know it, you can say it out of nowhere. So as this understanding increases, then your test anxiety should decrease. Like, is it going to go away completely? Probably not. So that's why we'll be talking about a few more strategies. But still, if you have that confidence of, I've self-tested, maybe the professor posted a review guide and I could do it all without using my textbook, or maybe I wrote some questions and I answered those, then you know, okay, I've covered the material, and you can reassure yourself every time you go through those moments where you're freaking out about the test. To combat anxiety, it requires motivation, time management, good study habits, and self-discipline. So that's what we're going to be talking and doing with the handouts that you have. The first thing is motivation. Who here loves to wake up, go straight to do homework? No one. So the thing is, sometimes it's not just motivation, but it's also self-discipline. It's being able to push past that need to stay in bed and watch Netflix in the morning, and it's past going through that and saying, no, I need to sit down and study. Maybe you're not going to study for 6 hours as you had planned, but maybe studying for 2 hours, 3 hours, and giving yourself breaks. And while this sounds like, oh, I want to wake up, I want to do things, it's hard. So you need to find ways to create routines and habits that would help you get there. The first one is having a fixed schedule for studying every day. So just like you have your classes, and hopefully you're going to all of your classes all of the time, that's what we want your studying to look like. We want you to create that schedule where every day from this time to this time you sit down and do it. The reason why is not because we want to control your life, it's because it's easier. Just like if you are someone who's not used to having breakfast, but you're just like, you just wake up and go in the mornings, that's just your routine. Trying to get into having breakfast is going to be hard. The same thing with studying. If you already have a routine, it's easier for you to push through that not wanting to do it to actually sit down and do it. It also may be caused because you're behind on your lecture content, so you're maybe not reading your textbook. So sometimes it's actually finding ways to get caught up with the material. And who doesn't procrastinate? We all procrastinate, bless you, to some extent, but it's also being able to manage that procrastination so that it doesn't become an issue by having those habits, by having those goals that you set for yourself, and understanding how your schedule works, because if you procrastinate too much, then your grade's going to be impacted. But if you procrastinate to a point where it's like, I still have I need 6 hours to study all this material, but maybe you said, oh, I'm going to do it Monday, and your test is on Friday, maybe you can break it down and be like, okay, I'm going to study 2 hours Tuesday, 2 hours Wednesday, and 2 hours Thursday. You're still covering that time, you're just breaking it up in a longer period. I don't know if that makes sense. And then there's self-sabotage, and then I would add here friend sabotage. Like when those friends text you and they're like, dude, what are you doing? Like, let's just hang out and do absolutely nothing productive with our lives, which we all need. It's just not when you have the test coming up. So sometimes we do need to find out those things that that keep us from doing our things. So for example, in my case, I would say the biggest thing is when people say, let's go out to eat. Because I'm like, I have to eat. It's just I don't need 2 hours to go eat. So for me, I know when someone tells me, oh, let's go out to eat, I'm going to go straight and be like, yeah, I'll do homework later because, of course, we have to eat. Like, it's a thing we always do every day. So what is something for you all that you find that if people do or say or something, maybe in your case, like also for me, it's when I go home, the moment I touch my bed, like I'm not doing anything else for the rest of the day. So what are some things you do that would stop you from getting your things done?
Probably for me is
Nap. That's a huge one. You're nodding like, yeah. You too. What else?
Happened today.
It happened today, but you're here.
10 minutes
So,
turned into 20 minutes turned to an hour.
and that's a thing. My naps, I cannot nap for less than 2 hours. Like,
But
that's
it's one of
bad.
those things where, you know, you get what you need to get done, but, you know, if that happens every now and again, it's okay.
Exactly.
You can't beat yourself up.
Yeah, and that's why it's important to have a schedule, because you're able to move things around as you need. Like, I'm not saying stop napping, stop hanging out with friends, stop going out, stop doing all these things. It's just manage your schedule in a way that you can move things around to still have the time that you need. Because you might have a paper that's 20 pages long and they wait until the day before to do it, where you could have done it a week earlier and not be stressing out about it, and maybe you had more quality content because you gave yourself some breaks. Any other sabotage?
You know, when you say like, oh, I'll do it at 9, and then 9 comes up, and then 9:01,
And you're like,
oh,
yeah,
it's 10.
I'll do it later. That's a huge one too. Anything else? Cool. So again, motivation is amazing, but we need to move to self-discipline, because sometimes you're not going to wake up one day and be like, yes, I want to study Oregon 1 for like 6 hours straight. Like, no, that's not going to happen. But you need the discipline to push through it. And life can be overwhelming. You, I'm sure, have a lot of things going on with your life. You might be working, you have friends, a love life, class, work, family, homework, sleep, hobbies, food, and maybe you're involved in a bunch of things. And that feels overwhelming. So that's when you need to really sit down and see, okay, what do I need? What are my priorities? And really realize, okay, maybe there are things here that I need to move, and maybe there are things here that need to stay. Because sometimes, like, if you're someone who really likes to exercise and that's something that you need to have in your life, then that might help you with your anxiety. Or for me, it's just doing nothing for an entire day of the week. Like, just one day I need where I do nothing. And then I realize, okay, this is what helps me push through the rest of the week. So it's also finding that. But the truth is, there is time to do everything. I really like this thing it's like a snapshot of what your week would look like. And there are 168 hours in 1 week. If you're taking 15 credits, you are in class for 15 hours. Then let's say you're getting 8 hours of sleep at night, which we all know not everyone does. That would be 56. And then let's say you do 21 hours of eating. So it's 3 hours per day. If you don't have breakfast, and some of us skip meals, which is not good, but that happens. So not even 21. But let's say you sit down, you cook, you do all these things. Then you still have 76 hours left that you can use. Let's say you're working 20 hours, so you're working part-time, and then you're using 25 hours of relaxing and socializing. So let's say that's pretty much the entire weekend. You still have 31 hours throughout the week. Are you going to study 31 hours? Probably not. Probably your classes don't demand that much time, but if they do, you have it. So it's just a matter of reorganizing your things, realizing where do I spend most of my time. If you're binge watching a TV show, maybe that's where all of your time is going. There's this app called TV Shows where you can add how many hours, like you can add the episodes that you've watched, and it'll tell you how many hours you've spent watching TV. That is scary. Like, I've done that. And that's a lot of time that you invest. So it's reorganizing, okay, where's my time going? How am I going to use it? So you have a schedule with you. And if you've been to one of my prior workshops, probably you've done this already. Because the reason why I'm talking so much about time management is because in order to study and be prepared for the test, you need to figure out when you can do it. So you have one of these handouts, which is a schedule. And I'm going to ask you, by the way, the reason I'm here is because they're recording my face, even though this is awkward for me to see later. So I'm saying here because the camera is here. So you have this full view of your week. I'm going to ask you to put in first your classes and then any other things that you have going on. So if like you go to, if you like to do it on your, by the way, I see you all have like computers and iPads. If you want to do it there and you want to do it like in Google Calendars, you can do in your Google Cal, you can go ahead and do that as well. Whatever you prefer. It's just for you to have a view of when you can do things. So go ahead, put in your classes, all of your classes, even the ones that you've been skipping. Like, go ahead and put those in. If you like to exercise, put that in. Or if you're planning on really getting serious and that's like your New Year's resolution, go ahead and put it in. If you have to commute, make sure you put that in because that's not time you can use for anything else other than commuting. If you always go to office hours, go ahead and put that in. If you go to SI consistently, tutoring consistently, go ahead, put that in. Bless you. And then as you do that, think about the times where you're more likely to actually sit down and study. So in my case, I know on Fridays afternoon, I'm not going to be sitting down and doing any type of studying because I know me. Like after that point, I'm like over with my week and I won't do anything until Sunday. So if you know that of yourself and you're maybe not a morning person, don't put time to study in the morning, but put time to study where you know you're more likely to do it. If you like to come in after your classes and go to the library, and that's usually the time you use to study, go ahead and put it in. If you need a break, for me, after lunch, like around like from 2 to 3, I need a break because that's when I'm not productive. So I wouldn't put studying time there, but I would put it after 3 at around 3:30 until like 6 because that's my time. But that's personal for me. Maybe you're someone who likes to wake up at 7 a.m. and do work right from when you wake up. Or maybe you're someone who needs a longer morning routine. I can be out of my house in 30 minutes. Some people need 2 hours, and that's fine. Just make sure you're putting that in your calendar, in your schedule, so that you know when you're available. And put some time to sleep. What you would aim for. So we're aiming for 8 hours. That would be the best ideal case. Just make sure you put it in so that when you're planning on your week, you can say, I have time to sleep, I have time to do all of these things. If you need a nap today's Tuesday. If you need a nap every Tuesday after class, go ahead and put it in. Because we all know you're going to take it. If you work, put it in as well. And this is an example. It looks packed. And maybe for you, that gives you anxiety. For some people, that's what happens. In my case, I love looking at my calendar and making it look like that, because then I know that I have to sit down and do everything that I say I'm going to do, because I won't have time later on to do it. However, if that gives you, again, anxiety, then maybe you want to leave a few things out, like your lunchtime and like sleep and things like that, even though you're writing down like things like traveling and a few things that you need to take into account. So it's a matter of finding what works best for you. I'm going to keep going because we're going to be adding a few more things to it. So now you have a schedule. That's amazing. And you're like, how is this going to help me with anxiety? That's what we're going for. I want you to choose one of your classes right now and think about, maybe you're going to choose the one class you have an exam for coming up. Maybe you saw this workshop and you were like, I need that, and there's a reason for that. So think about those classes that made you come here. Think about the most difficult or challenging class that you have, or the one that has the most amount of work for you to do. And I'm going to go around and ask you to give me that class. So I'm going to start here. What class are you thinking of?
Equity and capital markets.
Sorry, which one?
Equity and capital markets.
Okay, equity and temporal markets.
Capital markets.
Okay, I cannot pronounce that. But that class, okay. Biochem. We have SI leaders for that and tutors, right? Jess, do we have tutors for biochem? Yes. Macroeconomics, that's a common one.
Sorry, I'm going to ask, what did you ask?
It's fine. So what class either made you come here? What class do you have an exam coming up for that you want us to focus? Because we're going to do a few more things as we go. So I want you to choose a class that you could apply it to.
Data analysis.
Data analysis and genetics. We also have an SI leader for genetics. And I don't know if we don't have a tutor, but we have an SI leader for that. So whether that class has an exam coming up or anything, I want you to, in the back of this paper, write the ways that you study for that. So using flashcards, reviewing quizzes, reviewing notes, anything that you actually do. Going to SI, hopefully. What else? Just anything that you do to study for that class. Going to lecture counts, by the way. So write that down. And as we keep talking, you might come up with a few more things that you actually do. Now, the reason why we're talking about this is because we already talked about motivation and finding self-discipline within the schedule. Now we need to find ways that you're studying that are effective. So that's what we're going to move on to next, so that when it comes time to taking the test, you actually feel prepared. So the definition of studying is quite broad. So it can take place weeks before the exam, not just the day before. And with this, as I said before, I meant going to lecture is a form of studying, reviewing notes, writing your notes, rewriting your notes, doing homework. Those are all forms of studying. And there's a difference in gathering information. So going to lecture, reading your textbook and things like that are to gather information. And then you have the part about learning material. So that's usually what you do a few days before the test, where you start using flashcards, where you start quizzing yourself, where you use Quizlet, where you explain a concept to a friend. So those are distinct forms of studying. And when we are coming up to a test, we want to make sure we're using both forms. We already talked about this, but a few other ones that you could use are mnemonic devices, creating mind maps, creating outlines. I am personally a fan of outlines. You can create study guides, use practice problems, and all that. So, again, studying for understanding is going to class, going to the professor office hours, reading your textbook. It's not just one part, but the whole chapter, making a study plan. So scheduling your study times and being specific, being active and creative with study strategies. And this is kind of like what we're going to be working on for the next part of the workshop, kind of creating a study plan on how you can address that very difficult class you'll have that's probably stressing you out a little bit and making you anxious. Going to office hours is a great resource, because usually having that one-on-one relationship or being able to interact with your instructor in a smaller setting will help you clarify more of your doubts, and maybe you'll be more likely to ask more questions. And then we have studying for Hay. Are you here for the workshop? Yes, okay, so I'm going to give you 2 handouts that we've been using. And then, as I said, self-testing, self-testing, and self-testing. This is the best and most effective way of studying and making sure you actually know the material. So you can know, okay, so you all talked about one of your classes. Did you all take a test for that already, or are you coming up with the first one? You did. Okay, great. So now you know what the format of the test is like. So that's a step forward. Like now, your anxiety levels should be a little bit lower. Hopefully they didn't increase after that first test, but now you know the format, so you know how to prepare. What were your tests multiple choice? No? Fill in the blank? Like half was multiple choice? Okay. Were they content heavy or were they problem based? Half? Same. Okay, so we have a few varied things, and the reason why I'm asking is because usually you would approach each thing differently. You're not going to study the same way for math that you would for chemistry, because again, the content is different, and because the way they're going to ask the questions is different. So once you have taken a test, it's easier to identify the type of test that you took. So you can think about were the questions applications. So like you knew a concept, but they were not asking you for the definition. Maybe they were asking you for a situation in which you had to apply this, and what were you applying, or what concept was that? So if you think about that, then you really need to know the content of the class. Like you really need to dig deeper and really understand it all to be able to apply it into a setting. If you know that already, that your test is going to be like that, then you need to start creating your own questions so that they can be applied. Or you can go into a bank of, go into Google and try to find questions that are like that. If your test was problem-based and you had to memorize all these formulas, then you can go ahead and also find questions that are like that or start coming up with your own questions. And the reason for that is because if you create a scenario that is the most similar to your test, you will be the most comfortable when you're taking it. Self-testing, how often should you do it? You should do it all the time. One of the recommendations that I give is that after you sit down to study, every single time you sit down to study, you at the end leave a few minutes to do self-testing. So what would this look like? Let's say you're taking a math class and you went over an entire chapter that day. In the end, you're going to select 2 or 3 questions that you think are covering the most from the chapter and try to do them at the very end without any support. So you put your textbook away, you put your notes away, and then you just sit down and try to do those 2 to 3 questions. If you got them right, that means you were able to cover everything, you understood it, and you're good to go. If you didn't, next time you sit down, you have to review those concepts. And you're having a better idea of what am I struggling with, what should I cover more. And then another thing that I like to do is after you've covered that, next time you sit down to study, you bring up a few of those questions, maybe those 2 or 3, or maybe you change them but are similar to some extent, and you try to do them next time. That way you're spacing it out, and you can say, okay, maybe what information, you can figure out what information you forgot, what information you have to cover again. That way, if you keep constantly doing this as you go, and you bring back, let's say, something you haven't covered in 2 weeks, you bring it back and you do the questions and you're like, oh my God, I got this. It's going to feel feel great, and you're going to be able to reduce that anxiety. This is going to help you to check for accuracy and completeness. So maybe you didn't cover everything. You need to cover some more stuff. You can write it down and be like, okay, next time I sit down to study, this is what I'm going to cover. And another great way is trying to teach someone. So if you're already in one of the classes that, if you're already in a class that has a group me, which I'm not, you have to be careful with those, but if they're getting together to study, then that's a great opportunity to teach it to someone else. If you have a class that has SI, that's a great opportunity also to do that. And if not, I'm sure you can find someone, sit next to someone in a class and try to teach it to them. Any questions so far? Another thing is breaking down assignments. Does anyone do this? Break down assignments into smaller chunks? Maybe. Some of you. You're like, not at all. I just sit and do it all. Some people like that. Some people like that. I personally find that I procrastinate more if I do it like that, because I'm like, I have to sit down for 6 hours to write a paper. Like, I don't know about that. But if I do, I don't know, I'm just going to start with the first, the intro. Or I'm just going to read the requirements of the paper, then I am personally more likely to go ahead and do it. So breaking down assignments help you be specific about studying. Here's the thing. You need to be specific about what you say you're going to do in order to actually sit down and do it. So that's really helpful. And as you have your schedule, I highly suggest that as you're looking at your weeks, you actually sit down and write specifically what you're going to do for each of the classes. So you all chose a class. Think about the next exam, paper, or I'm pretty sure you all have exams based on the classes you gave me. So write the ways you're going to study for it in a form of a task. So let's say your class is covering chapter 3, 4, and 5 for the next exam. Write down, do flashcards for chapter 3. Or if you're going to do Quizlet for chapter 3. If you haven't read the textbook and you know it is important, read textbook chapter 3. And then you can do if your instructor has a practice guide or a review guide, do review guide. Again, we're trying to be very specific so that when you go to sit down and do it, you're actually more likely to do it. And then think about your schedule, and if this is coming up for you this week or next week, think about when you're going to do each task. Are you going to do it today? Are you going to do it tomorrow? And if you're going to do it today or tomorrow, at what time? You wrote down probably some study time. Think about that and where you're going to do it. So this is something that you should do before, hopefully every week, so that you can get a very better view of all the classes that you have coming up, of the exams that you need to take, and all the assignments that you have to worry about. And you can do it throughout your entire week and create a plan, a game plan. Creating a game plan is the first step. So once you have that, your anxiety levels are going to go a little bit down because you are realizing, I actually have time. Like, this was one thing that I think you mentioned earlier. You were realizing, I have the time to cover everything that I need to cover. And if for some reason I move something around, this is where I can cover other things as well. So it's estimating first. Sometimes it does come with time where you really are able to estimate down to the minute, like how much time something's going to get you. Something's going to take you, but this really helps with creating a broad idea of how your week is going to look like and realizing, okay, I'm good. I'm going to be covering all the chapters that I need to be covering. I'm going to be doing I'm going to be using all the resources that I have. I'm going to be going to SI, to tutoring, and all that. First thing, game plan. Second part is actually going ahead and executing it through self-discipline, motivation. It's realizing, why am I doing what I'm want him to do? So maybe it is you need to think about that grade that you want. Maybe it is about if you need to reward yourself some other way, go ahead and doing that, like giving you candy if you finish your homework, and things like that, whatever you feel like you need. Those are the first steps. As you go through this, you're using self-testing, your confidence level will increase. But then you're like, okay, that's awesome. What happens if I'm still anxious? We're going to talk a bit more about that in the few minutes that we have left. The first thing is to think positively. And I know you're looking at it and it's like, yeah, that's common sense. Like, why do you even have it up there? But when you're going down that rabbit hole, when they're about to give you the test and you're thinking all about the ways you're going to fail, that you're going to be miserable, and that you're going to be like having to quit school or something like that, think positively about the things you have accomplished so far. If you're taking, for example, genetics or biochem, I'm sure you've taken some other harder classes before. Same thing in your case, because I have never heard of that class. I'm sure you've taken macro and all those classes. So think about everything that you've accomplished so far, and think about the fact that you're probably not going to get a 0 in your exam. If you did all this studying, you know this. The reason for you to get a 0 is like, what are the chances? I don't even know the statistics of that, but it's not going to happen. So if you can start off with that, then that's going to calm you a little bit. That's going to give you some reassurance of, okay, I've got this, and then keep thinking, I studied, I followed through with my plan. That's why the plan is important, and following through is also important. And then tell yourself that you're doing the best that you can do. At that point, when you're giving the test, there's really nothing else you can study. You're doing the best that you can, and that's all you can do at that point. That one goes two ways, listening to relaxing music or the contrary. If you're someone that needs like that upbeat music, then maybe that's what would work for you best. It's just finding out what works for you. Posting motivational quotes as phone background or inside a notebook, telling one friend that you're super stressed about it and freaking out and you don't know how you're going to do it. That friend's going to reassure you like, you're awesome, you're going to do it. Try not to get your negative friend to tell you that. Try to get your positive friend to tell things like that. Get to your class or to your exam early. Make sure you have all the materials. And I blanked out completely. Get to class early. Make sure, again, you have your pencils, you check to make sure you had everything that they were asking of you. And once you sit down and you take, I don't know if I have it in the next slide. Okay, yeah. Once you sit down to take the test, always go with your first instinct. This was something that I read and I hadn't really I thought I had heard of it, but until I read it in one of our handouts, I started applying it. And I'm telling you, this has bumped my grades up so much. Always go with your first instincts. Don't second guess yourself. Unless you're 100% sure your answer is wrong, don't change it. It's usually your first attempt, the one you got right. Answer the questions that are worth the most amount of points. So you mentioned earlier how you were thinking, oh, I'm not going to have time to do all these questions that I have left. Start with the ones that you know have a lot of points. That way you have some points in your, when you're thinking about it, and sometimes you'll be calculating, oh, I know I've got for sure 50 points. That's going to start calming you down. If you start to freak out, remember that the test is not the difference between life or death. You're not going to die because you failed the test. Skip the hard ones. You'll come back to those later. I like to start them. If it's a multiple choice exam, I will answer with my first instinct, highlight it, and then keep going. So even if I don't have time to go back, I still tried something. And then I'll come back and redo it and really think through it. Keep focused. This is super hard. If you're stressed and you're anxious, I know this is hard, but take deep breaths to relax. I'm an early childhood education major, so we have a bunch of fun ways to breathe. One is called the pretzel. So you put your arms like this, and you cross your legs, then you pull it around, and then you need to get your tongue to go to the top of the roof of your mouth, and then you'll press it, and then you breathe. And that thing is amazing. I'm telling you, those kids can calm down. If they can, you all can. So try things like that. There are a bunch of ways to, there are a bunch of breathing techniques that will help you. Just find one that feels comfortable. Maybe you feel super self-conscious about sitting down in a classroom and being like this all the time. So find maybe something that works for you. Take your time. It is not a race. The first one doesn't necessarily get the best grade. I'm guilty of this all the time. I'm always the person that's trying to finish first, so I'll rush through the whole thing just so that I can finish first and get out of there. You don't have to. Many times I've made mistakes because of that, and I've been trying to push back on that and say, okay, wait, yeah, maybe I'll finish first, but if I go back and review, except for example, if it's like a math class, if I review my work, I know I'll get it right. So I've done that, and sometimes I've caught a few small mistakes that I wouldn't have if I had not gone back and done that. I gave you another handout. We're not going to go over it, but these are some common test-taking mistakes. And they are a lot of different things that sometimes happen to you because you're not paying attention, or you're just really, I don't want to say not paying attention, but not being able to focus because of your anxiety levels. So these are things to really think about before going to the test. So maybe you didn't follow the directions. You need to make sure you're reading it. Sometimes you need to calculate how much time to spend on each question because you won't have time. That's something to also think about depending on your test. You maybe didn't read the questions carefully. You make careless errors. All of this are corrected if you take your time and you really work through it. But in order to work through it, you need to calm your anxiety, and that comes from knowing the material and from being comfortable with it. If you do all this and you're still anxious, you're still not able to concentrate, then I highly recommend that you make an appointment at CAPS and go talk to them. They'll give you even more techniques to help you push through it. Think about it, though. If you have already a plan, if you're motivated, if you're following through, you are going to do great as long as you keep up with it. And if you're still struggling, we have a bunch of different resources that can help you out. So just create a network of support. I said we have SARC, we have supplemental instruction, we have tutoring, we have academic coaching, but then you also have your instructors, your professors. We have the counseling center, we have career services, Office of Student Financial Assistant, because sometimes your anxiety is coming from something that's not related to your classes. So if you need to take care of that, then we also have a bunch of resources that help you out with that, like Office of Student Financial Assistant, maybe your advisor, UCF Cares, your friends, your roommates, your study buddy, and your family members. So now that you know how to manage test anxiety, charge on. And please make sure you fill out those evaluations. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask me. And if you need me to sign anything, then this would be the time to bring it up. But besides that, thank you for being here. I hope you have a great rest of your day and your week, and that you all do amazing